Welcome, we are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and of late we came across a rather interesting book titled You Are Being Lied To, The Disinformation Guide to Media Distortion, Historical Whitewashes and Cultural Myths. And there's quite a lot of information on politicians or politicians, or their deceptions, their lies, etc. It talks about Fidel Castro, Oliver Stone, why they hate Oliver Stone, basically because he brought out the truth. Okay, he uncovered the myths told by his peers or predecessors, etc. Right? And they didn't want him putting up this true information about JFK and so forth. And there was lots of other interesting subjects, but we found one that really caught our eye, because we are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we strive to bring you the real truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's what we're all about in regard to biblical scripture and so forth. So we came across this section of that book called The Truth About Jesus Is He a Myth by M.M.Mangasarian, or Triple M. And we didn't know who the hell this guy was, so we decided to have a look online, and we found that he was born Mangasarian, December 29, 1859, and he died around about 1943. And he was an American rationalist and secularist of Armenian descent. Rationalist? What does that mean? In philosophy, rationalism is the epistemological view that regards reason as a chief source and test of knowledge, or any view appealing to reason as a source of knowledge or justification, a methodology, right? And a secularist, secularism is the principle based in secular humanism that seeks to conduct human affairs based on secular or secondary naturalistic considerations. It is most commonly defined as the separation of religion from civic affairs and the state. It may be broadened to a similar, and probably is referring to separation of the church or religion and the state. Okay, he's from Armenia. Okay, biography: born in Mashka, now in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire. He attended Robert College in Constantinople and was ordained as minister in Marsovan in 1878, a minister of, probably of the church, of a particular church. In about 1880, he enrolled at Princeton University, obviously in the USA. He was pastor at a Presbyterian church in Philadelphia from 1882 to 1885, when he resigned, becoming an independent preacher and a lecturer on independent religion in New York. In 1892, he became leader of the Ethical Cultural Society of Chicago, which were or referred to as ethical cultural movement, ethical humanism, or simply ethical culture, an ethical, educational and religious movement that is usually tracked back to Felix Adler, 1851 to 1933. And they have individual chapter organisations. A group established by Felix Adler. In 1900, he organised the Independent Religious Society of Chicago, a rationalist group, of which he remained pastor until 1925. He retired to Piedmont, California, where he lived for the rest of his life. During his life, Mangasarian wrote a number of books, his most popular including The Truth About Jesus Is He a Myth? That's the one we're going to read about. 1909, and The Bible Unveiled, 1911. Deal with the evidence against the existence of an historical Jesus. He also wrote hundreds of essays and lectures on questions of the time. His books and essays were translated in French, German, Spanish, and other foreign languages. The general subject of his writing was religious criticism and the philosophy of religion. Mangasarian considered himself a rationalist or secularist, not an atheist, since he considered atheism a non-verifiable belief system. So he was a rationalist or a secularist, not an atheist, since he considered atheism a non-verifiable belief system. This is biographies here. Christian Science, a comedy in 4 acts. The Truth About Jesus Is He a Myth, which we're going to jump to now. the story of Joan of Arc, the witch saint. So I'm going to go back. Actually, we found another. No, that's Wikipedia. It's not the one we wanted. Get rid of that one. Okay, we found another website called the Secular Web, a drop of reason in a pool of confusion, and it talks about M.M.Mangasarian, truth about Jesus. Is he a myth? By education, most have been misled, so they believe because they were so bred. The priest continues what the nurse began, and thus the child imposes on the man. Preface. The following work offers an in-book form the series of studies on the question of the historicity of Jesus, presented from time to time before the Independent Religious Society in Orchestra Hall. No effort has been made to change the manner of the spoken word into the more regular form of the written word. M.M.Mangasarian, and obviously spelled his name wrong by the look of it. Part 1, a parable. I am today 2,500 years old. I have been dead for nearly as many years. My place of birth was Athens. My grave was not far from those of Xenophon and Plato, within view of the white glory of Athens and the shimmering waters of the Aegean Sea. After sleeping in my grave for many centuries, I awoke suddenly. I cannot tell how nor why. I was transported by a force beyond my control to this new day in this new city. I arrived here at daybreak when the sky was still dull and drowsy. As I approached the city, I heard bells ringing, and a little later I found the streets astir with throngs of well-dressed people and family groups wending their way hither and thither. Evidently they were not going to work, for they were accompanied by their children in their best clothes, and a pleasant expression was upon their faces. This must be a day of festival and worship devoted to one of their gods, I murmured to myself. Looking about me, I saw a gentleman in a neat black dress, smiling, and his hand extended to me with great cordiality. He must have realized I was a stranger and wished to tend his hospitality to me. I accepted it gratefully. I clasped his hand. He pressed mine. We gazed for a moment into each other's eyes. He understood my bewilderment amid my novel surroundings and offered to enlighten me. He explained to me the ringing of the bells and meaning of the holiday crowds moving in the streets. It was Sunday before Christmas, and the people were going to the house of God. Of course you are going there too, I said to my friendly guide. Yes, he answered. I conducted the worship. I am a priest. A priest of Apollo? I interrogated. No, he replied, raising his hand to command silence. Apollo is not a god. He was only an idol. An idol? I whispered, taken by surprise. I perceive you are a Greek, he said to me. And the Greeks, he continued, notwithstanding their distinguished accomplishments, were an idolatrous people. They worshipped gods that did not exist. They built temples to divinities which were merely empty names. Empty names, he repeated. Apollo and Athena, and the entire Olympian lot were no more than inventions of the fancy. But the Greeks loved their gods, he protests, his heart clamouring in his breast. They were not gods, they were idols, and the difference between a god and an idol is this. An idol is a thing, God is a living being. When you cannot prove the existence of your God, when you have never seen him, nor heard his voice, nor touched him, when you have nothing provable about him, he is an idol. Have you seen Apollo? Have you heard him? Have you touched him? No, I said in a low voice. Do you know of anyone who has? I had to admit that I did not. He was an idol then and not a god. But many of us Greeks, I said, have felt Apollo in our hearts and have been inspired by him. You imagine you have, returned my guide. If he were really divine, he would be living to this day. Is he, then, dead? I asked. He never lived, and for the last 2,000 years or more his temple has been a heap of ruins. I wept to hear that Apollo, the god of light and music, was no more, that his fair temple had fallen into ruins, and the fire upon his altar had been extinguished. Then, wiping a tear from my eyes, I said, Oh, but our gods were fair and beautiful, our religion was rich and picturesque. It made the Greeks a nation of poets, orators, artists, warriors, thinkers. It made Athens a city of light. It created the beautiful, the true, the good. Yes, our religion was divine. It only had one fault, interrupted my guide. What was that? I inquired without knowing what his answer would be. It was not true. But I still believe in Apollo, I exclaimed. He's not dead. I know he's alive. Prove it, he said to me. Dead, pausing for a moment. If you produce him, he said, we shall all fall down and worship him. Produce Apollo, and he shall be our god. Produce him, I whispered to myself. What blasphemy then? Taking heart, I told my God how more than once I had felt Apollo's radiant presence in my heart, and told him of the immortal lines of Homer concerning the divine Apollo. Do you doubt Homer? I said to him. Homer, the inspired bard. Homer, whose inkwell was as big as the sea, whose imperishable page was time. Homer, whose every word was a drop of light. Then I proceeded to quote from Homer's Iliad, the Greek Bible, worshipped by all the Hellenes, because that's what they were called before they were called Greeks, Hellenes, and the rarest manuscript between heaven and earth. I quoted his description of Apollo, whose lyre nothing is more musical, it must be some sort of, or lyre, some sort of musical instrument, than those whose speech even honey is not sweeter. I recited how his mother went from the town to town to select a worthy place to give birth to the young god, and so forth. Yeah, and he goes on and on. By this time we stood at the entrance of a large edifice which my guide said was the house of God. As we walked in, I saw innumerable little lights blinking and winking all over the spacious interior. There were, besides pictures, altars and images all around me. The air was heavy with incense. A number of men in gorgeous vestments were passing to and fro, bowing and kneeling before the various lights and images. The audience was upon its knees, enveloped in silence, a silence so solemn that it awed me, or it amazed him. Observing my anxiety to understand the meaning of all this, my guide took me aside and in a whisper told me that the people were celebrating the anniversary of the birthday of their beautiful Saviour, Jesus the Son of God. So was Apollo the Son of God? I replied, thinking perhaps that after all we might find ourselves in agreement with one another. Forget Apollo, he said, with a suggestion of severity in his voice. There's no such person. He was only an idol. If you were to search for Apollo in all the universe, you would never find anyone answering to his name or description. Jesus, he resumed, is the Son of God. He came to our earth and was born of a virgin. Again, I was tempted to tell my guide that was how Apollo became incarnate, but I restrained myself. Then Jesus grew up to be a man, continued my guide, performing unheard of wonders, such as treating the seas, giving sight, hearing, and speech to the blind, the deaf, and the dumb, converting water into wine, feeding the multitudes, miraculously predicting coming events, and resurrecting the dead. Of course, of your gods too, he added, it is claimed that they perform miracles, and of your oracles that they foretold the future, but there is this difference. The things related of your gods are a fiction, the things told of Jesus are a fact, and the difference between paganism and Christianity is the difference between fiction and fact. Just then I heard a wave of murmur, like the rustling of leaves in a forest, sweep over the bowed audience. I turned about and unconsciously, my Greek curiosity impelling me, I pushed forward toward where the greater candle lights were blazing. He goes blah blah blah, carries on. But my guide placed his hand quickly upon my shoulder and held me back. I wanted to see the real God, Jesus. I, who had believed in Apollo without ever having known anything provable about him, I wanted to see the real God, Jesus. I, who had never seen a God, never touched one, never heard one speak, I, who had believed in Apollo without ever having known anything provable about him, I wanted to see the real God, Jesus. But my guide placed his hand quickly upon my shoulder and held me back. I want to see Jesus, I hastened, turning toward him. I said this reverently and in good faith. Will he not be here this morning? Will he not speak to his worshippers? I asked again. Will he not permit them to touch him, to caress his hand, to clasp his divine feet, to inhale the ambrosial fragrance of his breath, to bask in the golden light of his eyes, to hear the music of his immaculate accents? Let me too see Jesus, I pleaded. You cannot see him, answered my guide with a trace of embarrassment in his voice. He does not show himself any more. I was too much surprised at this to make any immediate reply. For the last 2,000 years, my guide continued, it has not pleased Jesus to show himself to anyone, neither has he been heard from for the same number of years. For 2,000 years, no one has either seen or heard Jesus? I asked, my eyes filled with wonder and my voice quivering with excitement. No, he answered. Would not that then, I ventured to ask impatiently, make Jesus as much of an idol as Apollo? And are not these people on their knees before a God of whose existence they are as much in the dark as were the Greeks of fair Apollo, and of whose past they have only rumours such as Homer reports of our Olympian gods, as idolatrous as the Athenians? What would you say, I asked my guide, if I were to demand that you should produce Jesus and prove him to my eyes at ease as you have asked me to produce and prove Apollo? What is the difference between a ceremony performed in honour of Apollo and one performed in honour of Jesus, since it is as impossible to give oracular demonstration of the existence of the one as the other? If Jesus is alive and a God, and Apollo is an idol and dead, what is the evidence? Since the one is as invisible, as inaccessible, and as unproducible as the other. And if faith that Jesus is a God proves him a God, why will not faith in Apollo make him a God? But if worshipping Jesus, whom for the best part of the last 2,000 years no man has seen, heard, or touched, if building temples to him, burning incense upon his altars, bowing at his shrine, and calling him God is not idolatry, neither is it idolatry to kindle fire upon the luminous altars of the Greek Apollo, god of the dawn, master of the enchanted lyre, he with the bow and arrow tipped with fire. I am not denying, I said, that Jesus ever lived. He may have been alive 2,000 years ago, but if he has not been heard from since, if the same thing that happened to the people living at the time he lived has happened to him, namely if he is dead, then you are worshipping the dead, which in fact stamps your religion as idolatrous. And then, remembering what he had said to me about the Greek mythology being beautiful but not true, I said to him, your temples are indeed gorgeous and costly, your music is grand, your altars are superb, your litany is exquisite, your chants are melting, your incense and bells and flowers, your gold and silver vessels are all in rare taste, and I dare say your dogmas are subtle, and your preachers eloquent, but your religion has one fault, it is not true. In confidence. So he says he shall speak in a straightforward way, and shall say today what perhaps I should say tomorrow or 10 years from now, but shall say it today, because I cannot keep it back, because I have nothing better to say than the truth, or what I hold to be the truth. But why seek truths that are not pleasant? We cannot help it. No man can suppress the truth. Truth finds a crack or crevice to crop out of. It bobs to the surface, up to the surface, and all the volume and weight of waters cannot keep it down. Truth prevails. Life, death, truth. Behold, these three no power can keep back. And since we are doomed to know the truth, let us cultivate a love for it. It is of no avail to cry over lost illusions, to long for vanquished dreams, or to call to the departing gods to come back. It may be pleasant to play with toys and dolls all our life, but evidently we are not meant to remain children always. The time comes when we must put away childish things and obey the summons of truth, stern and high. A people who fear the truth can never be a free people. For that truth, once known, will liberate you, it will truly set you free. That's what we believe. If what I will say is the truth, do you know of any good reason why I should not say it? And if for prudential reasons I should sometimes hold back the truth, how would you know when I am telling what I believe to be the truth, and when I am holding it back for reasons of policy? The truth, however unwelcome, is not injurious or injurious. It is error which raises false hopes, which destroys, degrades and pollutes, and which sooner or later must be abandoned. Was it not Spencer, whom Darwin called our great philosopher, who said, repulsive as it is, as it aspects the hard fact which dissipates a cherished illusion is presently found to contain the germ of a more solitary belief. Spain is decaying today, and because their teachers for policy's sake are withholding the disagreeable truth from the people. Holy water and sainted bones can give a nation illusions and dreams, but never strength, and so forth. He has a difficult subject in hand. It is also a delicate one, but he was determined to not only to know it, if it is possible, the whole truth about Jesus, but also to communicate that truth to others. Some people can keep their minds shut. He cannot. He must share his intellectual life with the world. If he lived 1,000 years ago, he might have collapsed at the sight of the burning stake, but he feels sure he would have to serve the stake. Again, carries on. More information here. And he asks the question, is Jesus a myth? What is a myth? A myth is a fanciful explanation of a given phenomenon. Observing the sun, the moon and the stars overhead, the primitive man wished to account for them. This was natural. The mind craves for knowledge. The child asks questions because of an inborn desire to know. Man feels ill at ease with a sense of a mental vacuum until his questions are answered. Before the days of science, a fanciful answer was all that could be given to man's questions about the physical world. The primitive man guessed where knowledge failed him. What else could he do? A myth then is a guess, a story, a speculation or a fanciful explanation of a phenomenon in the absence of accurate information. Many are the myths about the heavenly bodies, which, while we call them myths because we know better, were to the ancients truth. Okay, so that's an agreeable explanation of what a myth is. Okay, myths contain a segment of truth, and the rest is fiction. To explain, as it's here, a myth is a fanciful explanation of a given phenomenon, especially when children ask, why is the sky blue? Why is there stars in the sky? Why? And then a person has to answer the questions. He doesn't really know, so he makes up a myth to explain it to that child, that developing mind. Okay, and goes on about religion. There is an important difference between a lecturer and an ordained preacher. The latter can command a hearing in the name of God or in the name of the Bible. He does not have to satisfy his hearers about the reasonableness of what he preaches. He is God's mouthpiece, and no one may disagree with him. He can also invoke the authority of the church and of the Christian world to enforce acceptance of his teaching. The only way I may command your respect is to be reasonable. You will not listen to me for God's sake, nor for the Bible's sake, nor yet for the love of heaven or the fear of hell. My only petition is to be rational, to be truthful. In other words, a preacher can afford to ignore common sense in the name of revelation, but if I depart from it in the least, or am caught once playing fast and loose with the facts, I will irretrievably lose my standing. So our answer to the question is, Jesus a myth must depend more or less upon original research, and there is very little written on the subject. The majority of writers assume that a person answering to the description of Jesus lived some 2,000 years ago. Even the few who entertain doubts on the subject seem to hold that while there is a large mythical element in the Jesus story, nevertheless there is a historical nucleus round which has clustered the elaborate legend of the Christ. In all probability, they argue, there was a man called Jesus who said many helpful things and led an exemplary life, and all the miracles and wonders represent the accretions of fond and pious ages. Let us place ourselves entirely in the hands of the evidence. As far as possible, let us be passive, showing no predisposition one way or the other. We can afford to be independent. If the evidence proves the historicity of Jesus, well and good. If the evidence is not sufficient to prove it, there is no reason why we should fear to say so. Besides, it is our duty to inform ourselves on this question. As intelligent beings, we desire to know whether this Jesus, whose worship is not only costing the world millions of the people's money, but which is also a drawing to his service the time, the energies, the affection, the devotion and the labour of humanity, is a myth or a reality. We believe that any religious persecutions or sectarian wars, hatreds and intolerance which still cramp and embitter our humanity would be replaced by love and brotherhood. If the sects, S-E-C-T-S, could be made to see that the God Jesus they are quarrelling over is a myth, a shadow to which credulity alone gives substance. Like people who have been fighting in the dark, fearing some danger, the sects, S-E-C-T-S, once relieved of the thraldom of a tradition which has been handed down to them by a childish age and country, will turn around and embrace one another. In every sense, the subject is an all-absorbing one. It goes to the root of things, it touches the vital parts, and it means life or death to the Christian religion. And he goes on about the problem stated. Let us now give an idea of the method that he proposes. He proposed to follow in the study of the subject. Let us suppose that a student living in the year 3000 desired to make sure that such a man as Abraham Lincoln really lived and did the things attributed to him. How would he go about it? A man must have a birthplace and a birthday. All the records agree as to where and when Lincoln was born. This is not enough to prove his historicity, but it is an important link in the chain. Neither the place nor the time of Jesus' birth is known. Okay, or is that verified? Well, because actually in the scriptures it does tell you where he was born, in Bethlehem. Maybe he's hinting at, well, okay, anyone can say that. You need verification, you need evidence. There has never been any unanimity about this matter. There has been considerable confusion and contradiction about it. It cannot be proved that the 25th of December is his birthday. A number of other dates were observed by the Christian Church at various times as the birthday of Jesus. The Gospels give no date and appear to be quite uncertain, really ignorant about it. Okay, so he's talking about the actual date as well as the place, I suppose. When it is remembered that the Gospels purport to have been written by Jesus' intimate companions and during the lifetime of his brothers and mother, their silence on this matter becomes significant. And he carries on. There's a lot more information there. We're going to stop there. You can read it in your own time. We'll leave the link to this particular article, this website, underneath this video. Okay. So back to this book, You're Being Lied To. Mangasarian puts here, let me now give an idea of the method I propose to follow in the study of the subject, whether Jesus is a myth. Let us suppose that a student living in, we just read that about Abraham Lincoln, and he must have a birthplace and a birthday. That the time of his birth, Jesus' birth, his death and supposed resurrection is not verifiable, is generally admitted. This uncertainty robs the story of Jesus, to an extent at least, of the atmosphere of reality. Of course, it is immaterial on which day Jesus was born, but why is it not known? Yet not only is the date of his birth a matter of conjecture, but also the year in which he was born. Matthew, one of the evangelists, suggests that Jesus was born in King Herod's time, for it was this king who, hearing from the Magi that a king of the Jews was born, decided to destroy him. But Luke, another evangelist, intimates that Jesus was born when Quirinius was ruler of Judea, which makes the date of Jesus' birth about 14 years later than the date given by Matthew. Was this discrepancy in an historical document, to say nothing about inspiration? The theologian might say that this little difficulty was introduced purposely into the scriptures to establish its infallibility, but it is only religious books that are pronounced infallible on the strength of the contradictions they contain. Again, Matthew says that to escape the evil designs of Herod, Mary and Joseph with the infant Jesus fled into Egypt. Luke says nothing about this hurried flight, nor of Herod's intention to kill the infant Messiah. On the contrary, he tells us that after the 40 days of purification were over, Jesus was publicly presented at the temple, where Herod, if he really, as Matthew relates, wished to seize him, could have done so without difficulty. It is impossible to reconcile the flight to Egypt with the presentation in the temple, and this inconsistency is certainly insurmountable. It makes it look as if the narrative had no value whatever its history, so forth. When we come to the more important chapters about Jesus, we meet with greater difficulties. Have you ever noticed that the day on which Jesus is supposed to have died falls invariably on a Friday? What is the reason for this? It is evident that nobody knows, and nobody ever knew, the date on which the crucifixion took place. It is, if it ever took place. It is so obscure and so mythical that an artificial day has been fixed by the ecclesiastical councils. While it is always on a Friday that the crucifixion is commemorated, the week in which the day occurs varies from year to year. Good Friday falls not before the spring equinox, but as soon after the spring equinox as the full moon allows, thus making the calculation depend upon the position of the sun in the zodiac and the phases of the moon, etc., etc. And he goes on about Oregon and what he had to say. Instead of producing historical evidence or appealing to creditable documents, as one would have to prove the existence of a Caesar or an Alexander, Justin Martyr draws upon pagan mythology in his reply to the critics of Christianity. All he seems to ask for is that Jesus be given a higher place among the divinities of the ancient world, and so forth. He's saying that the report that Jesus had 12 apostles seems also mythical. You remember, this guy's a rationalist and a secularist, but not an atheist. So he has a secondary point of view about the Christ and the history of him, etc., etc. One of the oldest critics of the Christian religion was a pagan known to history under the name of Porphyry. Yet the early fathers did not hesitate to tamper even with the writings of an avowed opponent of their religion. After issuing an edict, or that was a decree or a law, to destroy, among others, the writings of this philosopher, a work called Philosophy of Oracles was produced, in which the author is made to write almost as a Christian, and the name of Porphyry was signed to it as its author. St. Augustine was one of the first to reject it as a forgery. A more astounding invention than this alleged work of a heathen bearing witness to Christ is difficult to produce. Do these forgeries, these apocryphal writings, these interpolations freely admitted to have been the prevailing practice of the early Christians, help to prove the existence of Jesus? And when to this wholesale manufacture of the doubtful evidence is added the temple vandalism which nearly destroyed every great pagan classic, we can form an idea of the desperate means to which the early Christians resorted to prove that Jesus was not a myth. It all goes to show how difficult it is to make a man out of a myth. And there's more on pagan stories of gods born to virgins. Here it says that the cross was not adopted by the followers of Jesus until a later date, may be inferred from the silence of the earlier disciples, Matthew, Mark and Luke, on the details of the crucifixion, which is more fully developed in the later Gospels of John. The first three evangelists say nothing about the nails or the blood and give the impression that he was hanged. Writings of the two thieves who were sentenced to receive the same punishment, Luke says one of the malefactors was hanged with him. The idea of a bleeding Christ, such as we see on crosses in Catholic churches, is not present in these earlier descriptions of the crucifixion. The Christians of the time of Origen were called the followers of the God who was hanged, and so forth, because what's his name, Jovovich, the Timeline documentary guy who went around the Middle East looking for these lost 10 tribes and found them apparently. He says that he found evidence that the cross was invented and put forth by Constantine. The Christians used to use a X on your forehead. Okay, they'd do a sign of an X, not a cross. That was introduced again by Constantine at a later date. Okay, there's quite a lot here to read. For Christians now place any reliance upon the evidence from Josephus. The early fathers made this Jew admit that Jesus was the Son of God. Of course, the omission was a forgery. De Quincey says the passage is known to be a forgery by all men, not lunatics. Of one other supposed reference in Josephus, Canon Farrar says this passage was early tampered with by the Christians. The same writer says this of a third passage. Respecting the third passage in Josephus, the only question is whether it be partly or entirely spurious. Lardner, the great English theologian, was the first man to prove that Josephus was a poor witness for Christ. Yeah, some theologians say, yeah, be careful of this guy, Josephus. He was a Jew who became a Roman citizen, etc. All the benefits were heaped upon him. You could say, in other words, he is a turncoat. Okay, and he created all these stories, these claimed facts, to please his Roman masters, and so forth. Again, you would have to look at the personal history. Go do your personal research on this Josephus. Listen to the antiquities of the Jews, etc., and find out if he was a real deal or he was a shill, a Roman citizen paid to keep the Romans happy by having a Romanic version, something along those lines, a watered down version. Okay, it goes on about what's this? This is about Paul. He says, do not lose sight of the fact that when Paul was preaching to the Christians, there was no written biography of Jesus in existence. There was a church without a book, and so forth. It's quite interesting to look at both sides of a coin, right? Because coins always have two sides. Just don't look at one and run with that one and then give everyone hell. Okay, take the time to look at the other side of the coin. You'll notice there's a difference. Okay, they don't, and it's just a fake coin. They don't both have. Depends on what currency you're using. The head of your queen or your president. Okay, they have different images on them, so you can distinguish between the two, right? That's why you have heads, which would be a head of a leader, image of a leader, and tails, which would be some sort of native fern or animal or something like that, right? Okay, it goes on about Jesus and Paul. Okay, here we go. Here's some codes, apparently. It's just Bible code has been under development in various forms for a few decades. It didn't really attract serious attention until Wittstern and Ripp's 1994 paper. In June 1997, a sensational book entitled The Bible Code by journalist and Howard Hughes biographer Michael Drosnin appeared. It occupied the bestseller list for months and was enthusiastically pumped on the talk show circuit. Drosnin appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show in June, and his Bible Code prediction of a possible Californian earthquake in 2008 was enough to prompt host Oprah to swear she would move away from California before then. Okay, and Drosnin's technique is heavily based on that of the Israeli mathematicians Witzlum and Rips. Rosenberg did the computer programming for the work. Like them, Drosnin arranges the 304,805 Hebrew letters of the Bible into a large array, and so forth. Some believe that these messages in the Hebrew Bible are not just coincidence. God put them there deliberately. But if someone finds a hidden message in a book, a song played backwards, funny looking Martian messages, is that missiles, or some other object or thing, does that prove something else put the message there intentionally? Or might the message exist only in the eyes of the beholder and in those of his or her followers? Does perception of meaning prove the message was deliberately created, and so forth? Or is this phenomenon related mainly to the determination and skill of the person looking for a special message, any special message? It goes on about Nostradamus as an example. Here's more about the code in the Hebrew. Looks like one of those crosswords in a crossword book. Okay, it's going on about Australian mathematician Brendan Mackay and personal communication showed this particular person how to find hidden words such more efficiently in a search of a KJV Genesis at all possible steps. For his list of 25 names, came up with over 1 million additional matches. These included 6 hits for Clinton, 15 for Gardner, 3 for Hillary and Einstein, and 2 for Kennedy. Mackay's algorithm allows for much faster searches, and this guy quickly incorporated it into his own code programs, and so forth. Maybe it was Drosnin. Hidden messages in the Bible code. Saw something interesting there. Said about in reading a book, you have to be really careful. Oh, here it goes. Oh, jeez, get back up there. It looks like we have to be more careful about what we write. As I say here, the search for truth about equidistant letter sequences goes on. One thing he's looking at is how clumpiness of letters in real text sometimes produce many more or fewer matches than would be expected for a purely randomized text. And he found something like this in Isaac Asimov's book. Produced an amazing 7 matches for the word Nazi, even though only one was expected, and so forth. This result is apparently beyond chance, with odds at at least 2,000 to 1 against. And here it says, looks like they had to be more careful about what they wrote. And maybe there's some critics here. Jocelyn's claims are so sensational that they can be dismissed rather easily. The claims of the original Israeli mathematicians are much more difficult to understand and also to disprove. We are indeed fortunate that McKay and colleagues have published their extensive and devastating research on the codes of Rips and Vist. The promoters of hidden messages claims say, how could such amazing coincidences be the product of random chance? He thinks the real question should be, how could such coincidences not be the inevitable product of a huge sequence of trials on a large, essentially random database? Okay, Mystics and Messiahs. Myth killer Philip Jenkins unravels the Gospels about cults, about Rosicrucians, alchemists, Methodists. Very, very interesting. About cults and sects, SECTS. Who's Who in Hell. This is Arthur Miller. No, something about Arthur Miller. Remember, he wrote The Scarlet Letter, apparently. He's probably a couple of other books. Blinded by Science. That might be another interesting topic. Okay, so we'll leave it there. This is probably quite a long video. We may break it into portions. Hopefully you found it interesting, eye-opening. We will leave the link down below this video so you can check out this book for yourself. There are other ones similar to it, like Everything You Know Is Wrong. Okay. We can scroll down to the bottom here. Okay, there's the book. You Are Being Lied to, Disinformation Guide, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and so forth. So as we said, we can provide a link to that at the bottom. Here's one review that we noticed. It said, this person was amused, though hardly surprised, to discover that this publication is itself composed of disinformation, limited hangouts and diversionary writings. So this book saying you are being lied to is actually lying to you. It's composed of disinformation, etc. Yeah. So if you like this, again, if it opened your eyes, right, gave you insight, then subscribe to our channel, give us a like, add your comments down below, and we'll answer them as soon as we can. And then go share this video and all our other videos, our whole channel, The Ministry of the Real Truth, where we tell you the real truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. No hype, no fluff, no other. Yeah, and we'll see you on the next video.